Hi, I'm Madison Taylor. I'm a financial analyst at a mid sized investment firm here in Chicago. On paper, my life looks pretty ordinary. I wake up at 5 a.m., grab my coffee, catch the 7:15 train downtown, and spend my days crunching numbers for other people's money. But 3 weeks ago, at my cousin Jessica's backyard barbecue, my entire family decided to remind me exactly what they thought of my ordinary life. What they didn't know was that I was the reason half of them still had roofs over their heads. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room full of people who are supposed to love you, but instead you feel like you're completely invisible? Or worse, like you're some kind of charity case they have to tolerate? Because that's exactly how I felt that Sunday afternoon in July. The day started innocent enough. Jessica had just moved into her new place, a gorgeous colonial with white picket fence in the suburbs. She was throwing what she called a housewarming/family reunion, which basically meant everyone would show up, eat her food, and spend the afternoon comparing who was doing better in life. Spoiler alert, it was never going to be me. I pulled up in my 2018 Honda Civic. Reliable, practical, paid off. Nothing flashy, but it gets me where I need to go. As I walked up the driveway, I could already hear the laughter coming from the backyard. My stomach did that familiar twist it always does before family gatherings. You know that feeling when you're about to walk into a room where you know you don't quite fit? Madison! There she is! Aunt Linda's voice carried across the yard as I pushed through the gate. She was standing by the grill with Uncle Mike, both of them holding beer bottles and wearing those forced smiles people give you when they're about to say something that isn't quite nice. Hey, Aunt Linda! Uncle Mike! I walked over and gave them the obligatory hugs. Jessica's place looks amazing. Doesn't it? Aunt Linda beamed, but her eyes were already scanning me up and down. You look tired, honey? Working too hard? There it was, less than 30 seconds in, and we were already talking about how I looked tired. In Linda speak, that meant I looked poor, or unsuccessful, or both. I'm doing fine, thanks. I kept my voice even, pleasant. I'd learned years ago that defending yourself in these situations only makes things worse. Uncle Mike took a long sip of his beer. Still living in that little apartment downtown? Still renting, I corrected, though I'm not sure why. Maybe because the way he said little apartment made it sound like I was living in a cardboard box. Well, you know what they say, he chuckled. Some people are renters, some people are owners. Nothing wrong with either one, I suppose. Except the way he said it, there was clearly something wrong with being a renter. Something less than. Something temporary and unstable and not quite adult enough. I excused myself to find Jessica and congratulate her on the house. I found her in the kitchen, arranging a platter of what looked like very expensive cheese. She looked up when I walked in, and her face lit up with what I initially thought was genuine happiness. Madison! Oh my God, I'm so glad you made it. She hugged me tight, and for a second, I remembered why I used to love hanging out with Jessica when we were kids. Can you believe this place? I mean, I literally cannot believe I own a house. It's incredible, Jess. Really, you should be proud. I am. She gestured around the kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. You know, the mortgage is pretty steep, but Marcus and I figured we'd rather stretch ourselves thin and live somewhere we actually love? Life's too short to settle for some cramped apartment just because it's cheaper. And there it was again, that subtle dig. Was. Maybe she didn't mean it that way, but it landed like a small slap nonetheless. My cramped apartment was actually a pretty nice one-bedroom in Lincoln Park, but compared to this suburban palace, I guess it seemed cramped. Totally, I managed. You only live once, right? Exactly. Speaking of which, Jessica lowered her voice and leaned in conspiratorially. I have some news I'm going to announce later, but I wanted to tell you first. My heart sank a little. Good news from Jessica usually meant more evidence of how much more successful she was than me. Marcus proposed. She held out her left hand, showing off a ring that probably cost more than my car. Oh, wow, Jess, that's amazing. I grabbed her hand to look at the ring. It really was beautiful. A classic solitaire that caught the light perfectly. Congratulations. When did it happen? Last weekend. We went to that new restaurant downtown, the one that's impossible to get reservations at. He had it all planned out. The ring was in my champagne glass. She was practically glowing. That's so romantic. I'm really happy for you. And I was, genuinely. Jessica and I might have our complicated family dynamics, but I wanted her to be happy. The problem was her happiness always seemed to highlight everything that was missing from my own life. We were interrupted by more family members arriving. My cousin David and his wife Sarah, their two kids in tow. Then Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim. Soon the backyard was full of relatives I saw maybe twice a year, all catching up and comparing notes on their lives. I found myself doing what I always do at these things, finding a quiet spot where I could observe without being the center of attention. I grabbed a beer and settled into a lawn chair near the fence, watching everyone else mingle and laugh and show off their latest achievements. That's when I started really listening to the conversations around me. I just got promoted to senior manager. The salary bump is going to make such a difference. Thinking about getting a boat for the lake house. Nothing too crazy, just something for the weekends. Private school is expensive, but you can't put a price on your kid's education. Everyone had something. Everyone was moving forward, climbing higher, acquiring more. And there I was, 38 years old, single, renting, driving a Honda Civic that was old enough to vote. I pulled out my phone, not because I had anywhere important to be, but because sometimes scrolling through Instagram feels less lonely than sitting by yourself at a family gathering. That's when I noticed my banking app notification. A payment had gone through, one of my automatic transfers. I glanced at it quickly and then put my phone away, but something twisted in my stomach. Madison! Aunt Linda's voice cut through my thoughts. She was walking over with Uncle Mike and a couple of other relatives I didn't see very often. Come sit with us. We were just talking about Jessica's beautiful new house. I moved my chair closer to their little circle, already sensing this wasn't going to go well for me. Isn't it gorgeous? Aunt Carol chimed in. And at her age, when I was 28, we were lucky to afford a studio apartment. Different times, Uncle Mike nodded sagely. Kids these days are so much more ambitious. They go after what they want. There was something in the way he said it, looking directly at me, that made my chest tighten. Jessica's always been a go-getter, Aunt Linda added. Even in high school, she knew exactly what she wanted and went after it. She's got that entrepreneurial spirit, that drive. Speaking of drive, Uncle Mike turned to me. How's the job going, Madison? Still at that same company? Yeah, still there. It's going well. That's nice. The pause before nice was loaded with meaning. Steady work is important. Not everyone can be a business owner like Jessica. I took a sip of my beer, tasting the bitterness. No, not everyone can. I just think it's so important to have ambition, Aunt Carol continued, apparently not noticing that I was sitting right there. To really push yourself, some people are just naturally more driven than others. Some people are born leaders, Uncle Mike agreed. And some people are more comfortable with the status quo. I felt my face getting hot. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. This was a full-on character assassination disguised as casual conversation. Madison's always been more of a behind-the-scenes type, Aunt Linda said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Not everyone can be the star, right, honey? I forced a smile. Right. That's when I excused myself to use the bathroom. I needed a minute to breathe, to collect myself, to remember that their opinions didn't actually matter. I walked through Jessica's gorgeous house, past the family photos and the expensive furniture, and locked myself in her powder room. I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. Aunt Linda was right about that, but I also looked, I don't know, defeated? Like I'd accepted their version of who I was supposed to be. That's when I heard them. I was about to leave the bathroom when I heard voices in the hallway just outside. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mike, talking in those stage whispers that aren't really whispers at all. Just feel bad for her sometimes, Aunt Linda was saying. I know what you mean. But at some point, you have to take responsibility for your own life, Uncle Mike replied. She's just never had any real ambition. Even as a kid, she was always so passive, content to just exist. Some people are just born to be followers, I guess. Look at Jessica. Same family, same opportunities, completely different outcome. That's what I'm saying. It's not like Madison didn't have chances, she just never took them. My hand was frozen on the door handle. Remember when she was in college? She could have studied business, could have networked, could have positioned herself for success. Instead, she went for some generic degree and settled for some generic job. And she's still there. Same company, same position. I don't think she's gotten a promotion in what, 5 years? It's just sad, you know? She'll probably rent for the rest of her life, never own anything real, never build any real wealth. There was a pause and then Aunt Linda's voice again, quieter but somehow more cutting. You'll always be a worthless nobody, that one. Some people just don't have what it takes to succeed in life. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The air left my lungs all at once, and I had to grab onto the bathroom counter to steady myself. Worthless nobody. That's what my own family thought of me. Not struggling, not unlucky, not even temporarily down on my luck. Worthless. A nobody. Permanently and fundamentally flawed. I waited until I heard their footsteps fade away before I opened the bathroom door. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was close to crying. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I walked back to the party like nothing had happened. I smiled and made small talk, and complimented Jessica on her engagement ring again. I laughed at Uncle Mike's jokes and nodded along when Aunt Linda told stories about her recent vacation to Europe. But something had shifted inside me. Every time I looked at them, I heard those words. You'll always be a worthless nobody. The thing is, they had no idea who they were talking about. No idea what I actually did for work, what my real financial situation looked like, or what role I'd been quietly playing in their lives for the past several years. As I sat there watching them celebrate Jessica's success, watching them compare their houses and their cars and their kids' accomplishments, I realized something that made my stomach twist in a completely different way. They were toasting their successes with beer I'd helped pay for in a house that existed partly because of my signature on financial documents they'd forgotten about, wearing clothes they'd bought with money that had my fingerprints all over it. But they saw me as worthless. I stayed for another hour, playing the part of the quiet, unsuccessful cousin who was happy to fade into the background. I hugged everyone goodbye and congratulated Jessica one more time on her engagement. I told Aunt Linda her potato salad was delicious and promised Uncle Mike I'd think about his advice to maybe look into some professional development opportunities. But as I drove home in my paid-off Honda Civic, something was brewing in the back of my mind. A quiet realization that had been building for years, crystallized by those overheard words in Jessica's hallway. They wanted to see me as a worthless nobody? Fine. But worthless nobodies don't usually have the power to change people's lives with a few phone calls and some strategic financial decisions. I parked in my cramped apartment building and rode the elevator up to my generic one-bedroom. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. It was time to review some files. Because here's the thing about being a financial analyst that my family never bothered to learn. I'm very, very good with money. Other people's money, my own money, and the complicated ways that money moves between people when they need help but are too proud to ask for it directly. I opened my banking app and started scrolling through the automatic transfers I'd set up years ago. The payments that went out every month like clockwork, ensuring that certain mortgages got paid, certain medical bills got covered, certain business loans didn't default. Payments that had been so seamlessly integrated into everyone's lives that they'd forgotten where that help was actually coming from. I took another sip of wine and opened a new document on my laptop. At the top, I typed, Family Financial Review, July 2024. It was time for the worthless nobody to do some math. I stared at my laptop screen for a long moment, wine glass in hand, before I started typing. The numbers I was about to compile would tell a story my family had conveniently forgotten, or maybe never fully understood in the first place. Let me walk you through what I discovered that night. sitting in my cramped apartment that I apparently would rent for the rest of my worthless life. First, Uncle Mike's house. You know, the one where he stood by the grill earlier today, talking about how some people are owners and some people are renters. I pulled up the mortgage documents from 2019. Mike had been 3 months behind on payments, facing foreclosure, when he called me in tears. Not Jessica, not any of the other successful family members. Me. Madison, I don't know what to do, he'd said over the phone. The bank is threatening to take the house. Linda doesn't know how bad it's gotten. I've been trying to handle this myself, but I remember sitting in this exact same chair, looking at his financial situation spread across my laptop screen. His credit was shot. He'd borrowed against the house twice already. No bank was going to give him a modification, and he didn't have the cash to catch up on the payments. But I did. I'd transferred $47,000 from my investment account to cover his back payments and penalties, but that wasn't the end of it. Mike's income was inconsistent. He worked construction, and weather delays meant unpredictable paychecks. So I'd quietly set up an automatic transfer to cover the gap in his mortgage payments. Every month for the past 4 years, $680 had moved from my account to his, ensuring he never fell behind again. Total contribution to Uncle Mike's homeownership, $79, $840. I opened another file. Aunt Linda's medical bills. 2 years ago, Linda had a heart attack, a major one that required surgery, a week in the ICU, and months of cardiac rehabilitation. She had insurance, but the copays and deductibles were crushing. I still remember the day she called me from the hospital. Madison, honey, I know this is awkward, but her voice was shaky, tired. The bills are just overwhelming. We don't know how we're going to pay for all this. Linda had always been the aunt who slipped me $20 at family gatherings when I was a kid, who remembered my birthday when my own parents sometimes forgot. She'd been kind to me in ways that mattered, even if she participated in the family's general assessment of my life choices. I'd paid $34,000 in medical bills, outright. No payment plan, no negotiation. I called the hospital's billing department and paid the balance in full. Then there was Jessica's business. 3 years ago, my successful entrepreneur cousin had come to me with a problem. Her marketing consultancy was taking off, but she needed capital to hire employees and rent office space. Banks weren't interested in lending to a new business without significant collateral. Madison, I know you work in finance, she'd said over coffee in my kitchen. Do you know any investors who might be interested in a small business loan? I did know investors, but more importantly, I was an investor. I'd loaned Jessica $75,000 to start her business. Not as a gift, but as a legitimate business loan with a formal agreement and everything, except the interest rate I'd charged her was 2.5%, about a quarter of what any bank would have demanded. And when she'd struggled to make payments during her first year, I'd restructured the loan twice to keep her business afloat. Jessica's house, the one we'd all admire today, the down payment had come from the profits of a business that existed because I'd bankrolled it. I poured myself another glass of wine and kept digging. Cousin David's kids' college funds. I'd been quietly contributing $200 per month to each of their 529 plans for the past 6 years. Total, 28 out of the 800. Aunt Carol's car repairs when her transmission died 2 years ago, 4,200. Uncle Jim's credit card debt that I'd helped consolidate and pay off, $12,000. Even smaller things. The family vacation to Disney World where half the costs were mysteriously covered by points and deals that I'd actually paid for. Christmas gifts for the kids that were supposedly from the whole family but came out of my accounts. By the time I finished my review, it was past midnight, and the total was staggering. Over the past 5 years, I had quietly contributed $267,000 to my family's financial stability and success. $250,000 from the worthless nobody who would apparently rent for the rest of her life. I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. Tomorrow was a work day, and I needed sleep. But as I got ready for bed, something else occurred to me. I pulled out my phone and called my financial advisor, Alex Chen. Alex, sorry to call so late. Can you send me a current statement on my portfolio? I need the total value as of today's close. Sure, Madison. Everything okay? Yeah, I just need to check something. Can you email it to me tonight? 20 minutes later, Alex's email arrived. I opened the PDF attachment and stared at the number at the bottom of the page. Total portfolio value 1,247,890 wires. I was worth nearly $1.3 million. The worthless nobody was a millionaire. I'd been so focused on helping everyone else that I'd never really stopped to appreciate what I'd built for myself. My 401k, my Roth IRA, my brokerage accounts, the mutual funds, the individual stocks I'd carefully selected over the years. Even after giving away $250,000 to family members, I was still worth more than most of them would see in their lifetimes. And they had no idea. Saturday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made my coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and did something I'd never done before. I made a plan. Not a financial plan. I was already good at those. This was different. This was a plan for truth. I spent the weekend thinking about Sunday dinner. Every month, Aunt Linda hosted a family dinner at her house. You know, the one I'd been helping to pay for. It was supposed to be a tradition, a way to stay connected as a family. Usually, it was just another opportunity for everyone to compare accomplishments and subtly compete with each other. But this Sunday was going to be different. I spent Sunday morning getting ready with unusual care. I put on my best dress and a navy blue sheath that I'd bought for work presentations but never had occasion to wear to family functions. I did my hair and makeup like I was going to an important meeting, because in a way, I was. I arrived at Aunt Linda's house at exactly 2 p.m., carrying a bottle of wine in my laptop bag. Madison, you look so nice today, Linda said as she hugged me at the door. Special occasion? Something like that, I replied. The usual suspects were already there. Uncle Mike was in the living room watching football with David and Uncle Jim. Jessica and her fiancé Marcus were in the kitchen with Aunt Carol talking about wedding plans. Everything felt exactly the same as it always did, except I felt completely different. During appetizers, the conversation followed its predictable pattern. Jessica updated everyone on her business. We just landed our biggest client yet. David talked about his son's acceptance to a prestigious summer program. Uncle Mike mentioned that he and Linda were thinking about remodeling their kitchen. That sounds expensive, Aunt Carol commented. Well, we've been saving up, Linda said. Plus, our mortgage payment isn't too bad, so we have some room in the budget. I almost choked on my wine. Their mortgage payment wasn't too bad because I'd been covering more than a quarter of it for 4 years. That's smart financial planning, I said, and only I could hear the edge in my own voice. Dinner was Aunt Linda's famous pot roast, served in her dining room with the good china. As we ate, Jessica announced that she and Marcus had found a wedding venue. It's a bit over budget, she admitted, but we figured we could make it work. Maybe take out a small loan or something. Oh, honey, be careful with debt, Aunt Carol warned. You don't want to start your marriage in the hole. That's good advice, I said. Debt can be really tricky to manage. Speaking of which, how's the business loan situation working out, Jessica? Jessica looked confused for a moment. What do you mean? Your business loan, the one you took out to start the consultancy. There was a brief silence. I could see Jessica's mind working, trying to remember if she'd told the family about borrowing money from me. Oh, right, that's all handled, she said carefully. Good to hear. Maintaining good relationships with your lenders is so important. Jessica nodded, but I could see a question in her eyes. She was starting to wonder where this conversation was heading. After dinner, while Linda and Carol were clearing dishes, Uncle Mike started complaining about property taxes. They just keep going up every year, he grumbled. Thank God the house is in good shape. We're not dealing with any major repair bills on top of everything else. That's lucky, I agreed. Home maintenance can be so expensive. Remember when your transmission went out, Aunt Carol? That was what, $4,000? Carol looked surprised that I remembered. Something like that, yeah. It was a nightmare. Thank goodness we had some money saved. I nodded sympathetically. Emergency funds are so important. The conversation continued like this through dessert. Everyone sharing their financial wins and challenges, completely oblivious to the fact that their financial stability had my fingerprints all over it. Finally, as we moved to the living room for coffee, I made my move. Actually, before we get too comfortable, there's something I wanted to share with all of you. I stood up and retrieved my laptop from my bag. Linda, would it be okay if I connected this to your TV? I have a presentation. Everyone looked confused, but Linda nodded and helped me connect the HDMI cable. A presentation? Jessica asked. What kind of presentation? A financial one, I replied, opening my laptop. I've been doing some analysis and I thought the family might be interested in the results. My spreadsheet appeared on the TV screen. Neat columns of numbers, names, and dates. At first glance, it probably looked like meaningless financial data, but I was about to make it very meaningful. So, I began, facing my family like I was presenting to a boardroom. I've been reviewing some family financial patterns over the past 5 years, and I found some interesting trends. I clicked to the first slide, Uncle Mike's mortgage data. For example, let's look at mortgage payments. Mike, you mentioned that your payment isn't too bad. According to my records, your monthly payment is $2,100. But for the past 4 years, you've only been paying $1,420 of that yourself. Mike's face went pale. Madison, what are you? The remaining $680 has been automatically transferred from my account every month. I clicked to the next slide showing the transfer history. Total contribution to your mortgage, $32,640 in ongoing payments, plus the $47 down and $200 I paid to catch you up when you were facing foreclosure in 2019. The room was completely silent. Linda, I continued, clicking to the next slide. Your medical bills from your heart attack. The hospital shows a balance paid in full on March 15th, 2022, amount $34,000, paid by Madison Taylor via electronic transfer. Linda's hand went to her chest like she was having trouble breathing. Jessica, let's talk about business loans. Another click, another slide. Another initial loan amount, $75,000. Interest rate, 2.5%. Current balance, $31,000 after two restructures to accommodate cash flow issues. Jessica's mouth was hanging open. I went through every family member systematically. David's kids' college funds, Carol's car repairs, Jim's credit card consolidation, the Disney vacation, Christmas gifts, even smaller things like birthday dinners and anniversary presents that I'd quietly subsidized over the years. When I finished, the total was displayed in large numbers on the screen, $267,000. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Uncle Mike spoke up. Madison, we had no idea you were keeping track of all this. I'm a financial analyst, Mike. I keep track of everything. But why didn't you ever say anything? Aunt Linda asked, her voice small. Because every time I've ever mentioned money in this family, I get told I'm showing off or being inappropriate. I looked around the room at their shocked faces. Yesterday, at Jessica's barbecue, I overheard some interesting opinions about my financial situation. Jessica winced. She was starting to remember the conversation by the grill. Something about how I'll always be a worthless nobody who'll rent for the rest of my life and never build any real wealth. Madison, we didn't mean, Aunt Linda started. Actually, you did mean it. And that's okay. People are entitled to their opinions. I clicked to my final slide, a screenshot of my portfolio statement. I just thought you might be interested in knowing that the worthless nobody is worth about $1.2 million. If the room had been quiet before, it was dead silent now. Uncle Mike was staring at the TV screen like he couldn't process what he was seeing. Aunt Carol had her hand over her mouth. Jessica looked like she might throw up. The thing is, I continued, I never minded helping family. I'm not asking for the money back. Most of it was given freely, and the loans have terms that work for everyone. But I did mind being treated like I was some kind of failure, while I was literally keeping half of you from losing your homes or going bankrupt. I closed my laptop and disconnected it from the TV. I just thought it was time for everyone to understand the actual financial dynamics of this family. Marcus, Jessica's fiancé, was the first to speak. Jesus, Jessica, did you know about any of this? Jessica shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. I knew Madison helped with the business loan, but I had no idea about everything else. Madison, I'm so sorry. The things we said yesterday, the things you've been saying for years, I corrected gently. This wasn't just about yesterday. Uncle Mike stood up abruptly and walked over to me. For a moment, I thought he might be angry. Instead, he pulled me into the tightest hug I'd ever received from him. Madison, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. When I called you about the house, I was desperate. I would have lost everything. You saved my family, and I've been treating you like a worthless nobody, I finished. Yeah. He pulled back and looked at me, tears in his eyes. You're not worthless. You're the most generous, successful person in this family, and we've been too stupid and self absorbed to see it. One by one, the rest of the family came over to apologize. Aunt Linda was crying openly, holding my hands and telling me how grateful she was, how she never would have survived her medical bills without my help. David was shaking his head in amazement, realizing that his kids' college funds had been growing thanks to contributions from their unsuccessful cousin. But it was Jessica's reaction that surprised me the most. Madison, she said, pulling me aside while the others were still processing everything, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. I nodded. When you loaned me the money for my business, did you believe in me? Or did you just feel sorry for me? I thought about it for a moment. I believed in you, Jess. Your business plan was solid. You had the skills and the drive. You just needed capital. That's exactly what investors do. We identify good opportunities and provide funding. But I'm not some random entrepreneur. I'm your cousin who's been treating you like crap for years. You're also someone with a good idea and the ability to execute it. The fact that you're my cousin just meant I was willing to offer better terms than a bank would. Jessica started crying again. I built my success on your foundation, and then I turned around and used that success to make you feel small. Yes, you did. How do you not hate me? I considered the question seriously. Because hating you wouldn't change anything. And because success isn't a zero-sum game, Jess. Your business doing well doesn't hurt me. Your house being beautiful doesn't make my apartment less comfortable. Your engagement being perfect doesn't make my single life less fulfilling. But we made you feel like it did. Yes, you did. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What can I do to fix this? Treat me like a person instead of a cautionary tale. That's all I've ever wanted. The evening ended very differently than most family dinners. Instead of the usual polite goodbyes and promises to get together soon, everyone lingered. They had questions about my work, my investments, my life that they'd never bothered to ask before. Uncle Mike wanted to know how I'd learned so much about finance. Aunt Carol asked about my apartment, actually curious about what I'd chosen and why. David asked if I'd be willing to give him advice about his own financial planning. It was after 9 p.m. when I finally got ready to leave. As I was packing up my laptop, Aunt Linda approached me with something in her hands. Madison, I want you to have this, she said, holding out a worn leather wallet. I recognized it immediately. It was Grandpa's old wallet, the one he'd carried for 40 years until the day he died. Linda, I can't take that. It should go to one of his sons. His sons didn't learn the lessons he tried to teach about money and family and taking care of people. She replied firmly, You did. He always said, money talks, but wealth whispers. You've been whispering all these years, and we were too loud to hear you. I took the wallet with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside, I found something I didn't expect, a folded piece of paper with my name on it in Grandpa's handwriting. I unfolded it. It was a note, apparently written sometime before his death, but never given to me. Madison, you have the gift of seeing what people need before they ask for it. That's not just a skill, it's a calling. Don't let anyone convince you that quiet generosity is the same as weakness. The most powerful rivers run deep and silent. Love, Grandpa. I looked up at Aunt Linda through tears. When did he write this? The week before his heart attack. He asked me to make sure you got it when you were old enough to understand what it meant. She smiled sadly. I think you're old enough now. I drove home that night with Grandpa's wallet on the passenger seat and his words echoing in my head. The most powerful rivers run deep and silent. For years, I'd let my family's version of who I was become my own version of who I was. The quiet one, the unsuccessful one, the one who would always be a worthless nobody. But I wasn't worthless. I wasn't a nobody. I was a river that had been running deep and silent, carrying everyone else along with its current. As I pulled into my parking garage, I realized something had fundamentally shifted, not just in my family's perception of me, but in my own understanding of myself. I wasn't the cousin who hadn't achieved enough. I was the cousin who had achieved so much that I could lift everyone else up without them even realizing it. I wasn't the one who would always rent. I was the one who chose to rent because I liked the flexibility, liked not having to worry about maintenance and repairs, liked being able to move if better opportunities came along. I wasn't unsuccessful. I was successful in ways that mattered to me, ways that apparently mattered so much that I'd been willing to share that success quietly and generously for years. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I made my coffee, checked my phone, and saw 17 text messages from family members. Apologies, thank you notes, and requests to get together for real conversations about our lives. One message stood out. It was from Jessica. Madison, I've been thinking all night about what you said yesterday. You're right that success isn't zero sum, but I think I've been living like it was. I want to learn how to be successful the way you are, generously, quietly, powerfully. Can we have coffee this week? I have some ideas about how I might be able to return some of the investment you made in me, not just financially, but in other ways. Love you, cousin. I smiled and put down my phone. The worthless nobody was having quite a week. But then again, I wasn't a worthless nobody anymore. I wasn't sure I ever had been. I was Madison Taylor. I was a financial analyst, an investor, a millionaire, and apparently the person my family turned to when they needed help, even when they didn't realize that's what they were doing. I was powerful in quiet ways, successful in deep ways, generous in ways that most people never see. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough.